So hello everyone. So my microtalk presentation is about the deep ocean circulations, or we also call them the thermohaline circulation. So deep ocean circulations generally occur in this, the higher latitudes where the temperature is low and the density of the water is high. As a result, the water sinks down vertically, and then later on it spreads throughout all the ocean, throughout the oceans. So before I go into how it forms and the characteristics of the deep ocean circulations, and I will go through the deep introduction of the oceanic currents. What are oceanic currents? So the ocean currents are basically the masses of water, ocean water that flows from one place to another place. And oceanic currents are of two types. One is the surface currents, it is driven by the by winds, and another one, the deep current, are driven by the density of the oceanic water. And another thing about the surface currents is that it influences only the 10% of the oceanic water, whereas the deep ocean current is influence 90% of the all oceanic water. So hence the we need to focus more on the deep ocean circulations. And the driving force of the deep ocean circulation is, of course, the density. And the density itself is governed by the temperature and the salinity. And you can see here in this picture, figure number 6, how the variation of temperature as well as the salinity varies as we go from the lower latitude to the higher latitudes. And this is the variation of the the salinity in the lower latitudes, how it is decreasing, and at the higher latitudes, how it is increasing. Basically, then the the deep water, the salinity remains constant. And then another, the variable is the temperature, how the temperature varies from the surface to the deep oceans, and it remains constant in the surface mixed layer. Basically, the surface mixed layer is where the characteristics of the oceanic water remains constant, like the temperature, salinity, density remains constant. Then the thermohaline region is where the temperature varies rapidly, and in the deep water, the the temperature remains constant, and other parameters as well. So similarly, if you can see the variation, how in the lower latitude the density varies. It is low at the higher at the surface, and it increases, and then it remains constant. In the higher latitudes, actually, there is no such sort of temperature difference between the upper layer and the lower layer. As a result, there is no such sort of thermocline region. And also the density remains same throughout the depth. As a result, there is no such stratification. The sources of deep water masses. So basically, the deep water masses originate in the upper, the higher latitude and of the northern hemisphere, and the lower latitude and the higher latitudes of the southern hemisphere. Basically, if we see here, in this figure, there's a southern subpolar latitudes where, because of the extreme freezing of oceanic water, the rest of the water that remains in a liquid form, it gains the density because the salinity increases, and as a result it sinks down. And this water mass is called the Antarctica bottom of water. It has a high density, and later on it spreads throughout the all oceans. The same process occurs in the northern higher latitudes, where at many places, basically, the sinking process occurs, and they form a one big water mass body called the North Atlantic deep of water. The sinking process also starts here in the Antarctica convergence, where then they form an Antarctic intermediate water, but Antarctica intermediate water. We can see here in this figure that the density of the Antarctica bottom water is higher as compared to the North Atlantic deep water. And also, when these deep water goes down, they take oxygen from the atmosphere. As a result, they provide more oxygen to the lower marine life that is at the bottom of the ocean. And once they come up in the form of upwelling zones, so the upwelling zone, the nutrients are very high in the upwelling zone because they bring it from the bottom of the ocean. And another thing is that in the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, there's a lack of deep water masses because the Pacific Ocean has a low salinity, whereas the Indian Ocean has a high density. So identification of deep water masses, once these deep water masses get detached from the surface and they sink down, their characteristics like the salinity and the temperature remains constant throughout the duration in the deep ocean. As a result, we can use this kind of a property to identify the water masses, deep water masses. Another way to track down these water masses is basically by using some chemical tracers like the tritium we use to identify, to track down the deep water masses of it. So then there is a conveyor belt of circulation and the climate change. So conveyor belt is basically the model that actually combines both the thermohaline circulation and the surface currents. So this overall circulation resembles the large conveyor belt, so that's why this model is called the conveyor belt circulation. The upper, the surface current, so it basically transport heat from the equator towards the higher latitudes in both the hemispheres. And this heat actually, moderates the climate of the northern Europe and other places as well. Whereas the lower part of this conveyor belt starts when there is a sinking process at North Atlantic as well as the near Antarctica region. So as I said earlier, that these deep water masses, spread throughout the oceans. You can see how they are spreading in the Pacific Ocean as well as in the Indian Ocean. Another important thing is that the rate at which these deep water masses go down, which is equivalent to around 100 at Amazon rivers in terms of the discharge. And one important thing, about the North Atlantic region, basically we define one, called Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. It is basically the part of the conveyor belt that is in the North Atlantic region. And, it is it is very weak. This circulation is very weak now because of the global warming, because global warming actually increases the rate of melting of the glaciers, and glaciers bring more fresh water into the sea, then the salinity decreases, and hence the density decreases, and hence the circulation gets weaker. And the scientists believe in that in the future this AMOC circulation will shut down. As a result, there will be different climatic conditions in different places. So this is the conclusion that the stratification is because of the difference in the density, and the density is governed by the temperature as well as the salinity. Decreasing temperature, increasing salinity actually increases the density. And deep water masses actually originate in the southern and the northern subpolar latitude, that is higher latitudes. And the temperature and salinity characteristics of the deep water masses become, we use them for the identification of the deep water masses. And deep water masses, sustain the life both at the bottom of the ocean as well as at the top of the ocean layers, because in the bottom layers, they bring oxygen from the surface, and from the bottom, they bring nutrients to the surface. And climate change leads to destructive oxygen circulation by introducing more fresh water into oceans at higher latitudes, and that fresh water then decreases salinity and hence the density. So as a result, the climatic condition in different places may get, may change in the future. So the reference, though, I took all the figures as well as this reading, everything from this book that's called Essentials of Oceanography. Thank you.